imagine if more people will join us. Recording this, so anyone that joins later isn't able to make it can access the recording online as well. Just as a reminder, we're going to spend about 30 minutes now talking about the operational relief grants available for CIS fiscal agents, and then we'll transition at 2 o'clock, or I'm sorry, at 1:30 into our pre-existing meeting scheduled around the CIS contracts. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Sheila Duranlo, who is going to walk us through and provide us an overview in her role as managing these grants.
Thank you, Morgan. Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. I hope you had a great weekend. My name is Sheila Duranlo, and I am the Senior Policy and Operations Manager for the Family Services Division here in DCF. The Commissioner, Sean Brown, has asked me to be a program coordinator for this grant opportunity because it spans across many divisions within our department. The Economic Services Division is involved with the Child Development Division and the Business Office. So when you have a multi-divisional program, it's always good to have somebody who can keep their eye on the communication and coordination, just to make sure that we run an efficient process so that we can get the money out the door and into your hands. So I'm just going to take an opportunity to share some of the important dates around this grant program. As you might have heard, this is a $12 million federal grant program from the Coronavirus Relief Funds. And we have this funding available for many different types of providers. It's for childcare providers, summer camp providers, after school providers, parent-child centers, and then Children's Integrated Services fiscal agents. If you were just on the line a little while ago as a parent-child center, then this will be repeat information for you. As you know, probably know, the applications were opened on Friday the 7th and will remain open until August the 26th. We do have a question and answer period, which will be open until Friday. And that is the way that we are answering questions, to answering people's questions. So if you have a question, your grant application instructions instruct you to pose your question to the CDD-CIS email. And we will be taking those questions daily and developing answers to them if the answers don't already exist, and then reposting. So we are going to do that throughout this week. And that is where you can go to look at questions that you might have posed, and you might see other information that you may not have thought about or you may not have asked. I think that since the grant period, the application period is open for 2 more weeks after the question and answer period closes, I would suggest that perhaps you wait until after the 7th to submit your application, because throughout this process, the applications will be you can only submit once. So we're going to review the applications as they are submitted. And if you submit and then we've reviewed your application and then you want to submit again because you think you left something out, we will not be reviewing a second application. So it's really important for you to take your time. This is not a first come, first serve. So we are reviewing all applications that come in. So you don't have to hurry and submit thinking that all the money will be gone before your application comes in. We will close, as I said, we'll close the application period on August 26th. And then we hope to notice everybody about the awards by September 11th. And then we will work with the business office to get the funding out the door to you as soon as possible after that. So I think I'm going to pause there and see if Brian or Morgan or Tracy or Heather have any other information they want to offer on the process, and then see what types of questions you might have.
This is Morgan. The only thing I would add is that I think the application itself will be fairly familiar to many of you. It is very similar to the actual application form and format that we used for the retainer fund. And there are some similarities in terms of the process. So hopefully that will ease things kind of administratively a little bit for you all. But please still make sure that you're fully and closely reading all the instructions and following those closely. And if in doubt, reach out to us and we can help make sure you have all the information needed to complete an application correctly. And this is, as we've mentioned before, a competitive grant process. So any questions that you have will be answered in the form of the FAQ so that everyone has equal access to information about the process. But I'm hopeful that this will be familiar and as painless as possible for everyone.
And I have nothing to add. I think you guys covered it great. Accuracy and completion is much more important than the speed at which these are done. We've designed a lot of our communications around how these will be reviewed and what the federal requirements are and other sort of guidance around these funds. So the more we can all align with the process and the guidelines and the instructions, the better off we'll be.
Mm-hmm. And I think the only thing I have to add is I think in previous calls, if you were on a previous call, Sheila had said, you know, we do strongly encourage people. We'll be updating the frequently asked questions. You know, as we receive questions, that's how we're answering them, is on the frequently asked questions. And that all the way through this Friday is the last day to submit questions. So, you know, a complete frequently asked questions document would probably be posted by Tuesday afternoon of the next week, just so that we have time to answer those. But I would encourage everybody to watch those new questions.
So I'll open it up for questions about the process itself, if anybody has any.
And we are keeping an eye on the chat box, so feel free to just jump in or type questions if that's easier.
I mean, I think, Morgan, I think you and your team did a great job of simplifying the application. It's pretty straightforward. The expenses allowable for this pot of money really are related to providing telehealth services. So I think that it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, as folks will see from the application, there's a few you know, primary categories that we anticipated expenses may fall into, whether it's software, supports for clients directly, supplies for providers like tablets, or staff training, but there is also a place where you can put other things there as well. And it's split into both those expenses that have been incurred so far, and that can go all the way back to the beginning of March. So if there was an expense that is related to the delivery of services via telehealth that you didn't realize at the time in order to put on your retainer fund application or something like that, this is another opportunity to apply for that, as well as expenses that are anticipated from August moving forward. But to be really clear, all expenses, all reimbursement of expenses will be based on receipt of documentation and invoices for those. So you'll need to make sure to provide good documentation to support any of those.
Yes, thanks, Morgan. That's an excellent point. For your anticipated expenses from August through October 31st, sometime in the beginning of November, we'll probably send out some type of a worksheet or something for you to submit an itemized document of your expenses that you had applied for as anticipated that then became incurred. And then you will list them on that document and then send your receipts as well so that we can process those and get those out the door as soon as possible.
Hi, this is Chloe. I have a few questions. One is for anticipated, I guess, because maybe I'm behind, do we know how much of the $12 million is allotted to each section, or is it just sort of a big pot of money and you guys are going to decide once you get applications?
You're right. It's a big pot of money, and we're hoping that all of the applications total to 12 million or less, so that we can fund everybody who submitted allowable expenses at 100%. But we won't know until we see what the applications bring.
And so, Chloe, again, and I think this is unlikely, but let's pretend we anticipate a lot of expenses and we go ahead and spend the money, and then we don't. Like, my fear would be we would get reimbursed. So when you say an award, you will know by then if the 12, like whether you're within the 12 million or not, right? There's not a risk of us spending money we wouldn't get reimbursed for.
There's the only time you would spend money that you didn't get reimbursed for is if you spent money on something that you didn't send as an anticipated expense, or if that it wasn't awarded. So we will let you know based on what you submitted, how much we're going to reimburse in each of those categories: expenses incurred and expenses anticipated.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just Chloe again, sorry, just to be clear, Morgan, I get so confused about the $100,000 for CIS for something that this is a totally different pot of money, right?
So they kind of started in the same place. This is where things ended up. So just to go back on the legislative history a little bit, there was a lot of discussion over $100,000 for CIS telehealth versus other numbers and childcare and PCCs and all of that. And the ultimate decision was to put $12 million into a pot to fund all three of those purposes, and that it's left to the department's discretion to determine what the allocation between PCCs, childcare, and CIS is. So at this point, that $100,000 number that had been previously discussed is no longer relevant. Sheila or Brian, did I get anything wrong in that? Or Heather?
May I ask how this plays in with the sort of healthcare recovery funds and that really big pot of money, and as a CIS entity, if we should be going in one direction versus the other for funding options?
So I think you have a bunch of options that are, by the way, my name is Brian O'Connor. I'm the Director of Operations at CDD. Part of the process for this, the operational relief grants, is making sure that you're excluding other funds that you were awarded for coronavirus relief. So you're welcome to explore all the options that are available to you. Just make sure that they're mutually exclusive of one another, and that anything you've asked for under a different program is identified here.
And I would just add that it would actually bear us looking at how the timeline of those things add up, because it might work out pretty nicely that if you were to learn of the outcome or award under this grant on a timeline that works with the first or second cycle of the Healthcare Provider Stabilization Grant Program, it could theoretically be reasonable to, I don't know I think we would need to look at how those interact in the event that telehealth is an incurred expense related to COVID, covered through this versus the Healthcare Stabilization Fund. So at a high level, the Healthcare Provider Stabilization Grant Program goes back to March, has 2 cycles. The first cycle is not going to be as relevant to folks as the second cycle, and that's for COVID-related losses of revenue or incurred expenses. And that's not administered by DCF. That's administered at the agency level, and is going through an entirely separate process. As Brian said, if you are applying for funds through that, or if you are awarded funds through that and get notified of that prior to submitting your operational relief grant application to us that needs to be noted on your application. And the operational relief grant program that we're talking about today is much more narrow in terms of allowable expenses. So this is solely for the purpose of expenses related to supporting telehealth service delivery during COVID. So I think as a follow-up, like I said, we will take a look at the timelines to see how those line up and give you really clear guidance of whether someone could theoretically apply for telehealth related expenses through both programs. Because I think we do need to be really clear on that. Obviously, you can't be awarded funds for the exact same expenses through both programs. So if it's possible to get the timing right to avoid a possibility of that, I think that would be good.
Any other questions related to the process? Okay. All right. Well, you certainly have more opportunities throughout the week until Friday. And again, we'll revise the frequently asked questions with updated information. If there isn't anything new on the website each day, that means that questions haven't been submitted, and we haven't found any reason to revise the current document. So, go ahead.
So I just have one final plug if we have a second.
Yes.
Two lessons learned, I would say, from the retainer fund process that I think apply here. One is please make sure you don't miss it's a checkbox at the bottom that says, I have completed my, the methodology for how I will provide these funds to subcontractors if applicable. Please make sure you are not just checking that box, but in fact, attaching that explanation. There were a number of folks who, during the retainer fund applications, did not include that attachment, and we had to come back to you. And this application process, we may not be able to do that level of back and forth with you all. So please make sure you're reading closely and attaching all requested documents at the beginning so that we have what's needed to make your grant determination. Similarly, please make sure that you are reaching out as the fiscal agent to all of your subcontracted service providers and talking with your admin team about this. We have enough of a lead up that should be able to happen in terms of timing. And it's really important because one of the things that unfortunately we saw come through in our most recent survey to you all in the field about challenges you're experiencing, there were a number of people who reported concerns around having had enough PPE, for example, which was an allowable reimbursable expense under the retainer fund. So raised some concerns for me about whether or not subcontractors were effectively communicating their needs related to COVID relief to the fiscal agent. So please make sure that you are creating the mechanism for those conversations to happen, so that you are able to access COVID relief, not just on the behalf of your own agency, but all of the subcontractors involved in the CIS bundled contract.
Excellent points, Morgan. Thank you very much. Anything else, Brian or Tracy or Heather, before we let this group get on to their regular meeting?
Nope.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody. We'll let you get on to your regularly scheduled meeting and have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.